Hey lifers, Dustin here, and now that we are officially done with Rivalry Weekend, we are officially done with the last weekend of the regular season of 2017. Holy crap. It's time to officially look at the final weekend of the season and kind of preview it and see what teams need to do to get into the playoffs. Pittsburgh beat Miami, Auburn beat Alabama, and that was the beginning of some of the chain of reactions that we need to see happen to get some of these teams into the college football playoff. We have, in my opinion, 8 or 9 teams that are vying for 4 spots, and a lot is on the line this weekend in the conference championship games, while other teams have to kind of sit by the wayside and wait and hope that something happens in their favor to get in. So, just a disclosure at the beginning, this is all my opinion. The reason that I made a YouTube channel was to share my opinion and then hear from you. So let me know down in the comment section what I got wrong, what I got right, and who you think will be the top 4 by this time next week. So the way I'm going to do this is I'm actually going to kind of break it down into 3 sections. The first section is win and basically you're in. The second section is win and pray a little bit. And the third section is you need a lot of help to get in. And we will start at the top with Auburn. With the Tigers beating, in the span of, 3 weeks, 2 teams ranked number 1 in the college football playoff. First time that has ever happened in the long-running 4-year history of the college football playoff, but is a very unlikely and a very impressive thing to do. Plus, one of their only 2 losses is to probably the next number 1 team in the college football playoff in Clemson. If Auburn wins, they're in. No ifs, ands, or buts. We will have our very first 2-loss team ever to make the college football playoff. In my opinion, if they lose, they are out. Win and you're in, lose and you're out probably also applies to the Georgia Bulldogs, who will probably, if I had to guess, be number 6 in the college football playoffs. If they win, they will jump in. Whoever the SEC champion is going to get into the college football playoff. But Georgia's win against Notre Dame, their kind of premier keystone win of the season, took a really big hit when they lost to Stanford big in a fourth quarter blowout in Stanford Stadium yesterday. So that loss is now over a 3-loss team. It doesn't look quite as good as it did. Notre Dame wasn't highly regarded when that game took place. So kind of a win or you're out for the Bulldogs. Next is the Oklahoma Sooners, who obviously have a rematch against a TCU team they beat pretty soundly a couple of weeks ago. They are currently ranked 4th in the college football playoff, but Miami and Clemson are both ahead of them. Miami lost, and there's a chance they could end up beating Clemson on Saturday. So a win in Oklahoma is pretty securely in. I can't imagine that. And where I'm sitting right now, not literally, but metaphorically where I'm at, I can't imagine Oklahoma losing. I think they're almost a lock at this moment in time, but you never know with TCU. Maybe they could spring up and surprise the Sooners. If they do, Oklahoma's done. The Wisconsin Badgers are the only Power 5 team to go through the regular season undefeated and sit at 12-0 for the first time in school history. Pretty easy for the Badgers. Beat Ohio State and you are in the college football playoff. Lose to the Buckeyes and things get a little bit more interesting. Do you put an ACC loser ahead of Wisconsin? I don't know. Do you put Alabama ahead of Wisconsin? They have similar resumes right now, but Wisconsin's undefeated and Alabama's not. If Wisconsin loses and Auburn wins the SEC championship, well, Alabama's only loss is to an extraordinarily good Auburn team on the road in a huge rivalry game, while Wisconsin's is at a neutral site field to a 2-loss team that also got blown out by Iowa, the same team that Wisconsin blew them out, blah, 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 blah. So I think if Wisconsin wins, they're in. There should be absolutely no doubt about that at this point. If the Badgers lose, they're probably out. Next up is the Clemson Tigers. Now, they will probably, if I had to guess, be ranked number 1 on Tuesday in the very last college football playoff poll before the official playoff is unveiled. Pretty good spot where you want to be. That means if they beat Miami, unquestionably, they are in. Not only are they in, they probably get their bowl game of preference, which would be the Sugar Bowl, and they would play the number 4 team. So that's a pretty big deal. The interesting question is, what if Clemson loses a close game to Miami? Miami's a team that rose all the way up to number 2 until this past week when they lost to a Pittsburgh team that Clemson lost to last year when Clemson was number 2. The committee's not supposed to care about that, but They're human beings. How can they not think about that? Also, Clemson has a quality win over an Auburn team that, if they beat Georgia, will be the hottest team in the country, except for maybe Oklahoma. Will have won the SEC championship. Will have beaten number 1 Georgia, number 6 Georgia, number 1 Alabama. Clemson beat them. It was at home. It wasn't anywhere near the same two teams that we would see if they played right now, but they beat them. So there is a chance that if Ohio State beats Wisconsin and Auburn beats Georgia, Clemson could maybe sneak back in the playoffs at number 4. It would probably be Auburn, Oklahoma, Miami, and Clemson in no particular order. Maybe. That may happen. They would have arguably a better record than Alabama, even though they have one less loss. They beat Auburn and Bama didn't, right? Miami is not in the same boat that Clemson is. For Miami, it is a playoff. Win and you're in, lose and you are out. Their big quality wins on the season came in back-to-back weeks against Virginia Tech and Notre Dame. Neither of those losses look that great right now for the other team. Miami won. Neither of those wins look that great right now, especially with Notre Dame getting beat by Stanford as they pulled away Saturday night, and Virginia Tech losing that game to Georgia Tech. Then, if you really go back and reevaluate their season, even though they only have one loss, they had one game canceled against what would now be kind of a quality win against Arkansas State on the road. They had to come back from behind to beat Virginia and Florida State, and they had to hold off North Carolina at the end of the game. Now we're going to kind of move into Section 2, and that is win and need a little bit of help. The first team we'll talk about is Alabama. In my opinion, the Crimson Tide, who were number 1 all year in the AP poll for, 12 straight weeks, they need their arch-rival Auburn to win the SEC championship, and they need Ohio State to beat Wisconsin. Auburn beating Georgia makes Alabama's loss to Auburn not look that bad. If Georgia beats Auburn, now Alabama lost to a 3-loss team. Sorry, your resume already, if you look at the strength of the schedule for the Tide, it's not good. Their best win on the season is an LSU team that is a fine team, but nothing earth-shatteringly great against them. And then even though Nick Fitzgerald got injured early in the Egg Bowl, their other big win, I guess you would say, is against a Mississippi State team who lost to Ole Miss in the Egg Bowl. If Ohio State can beat Wisconsin, that would eliminate the Badgers. The winner of the ACC championship is in, along with Auburn and probably Oklahoma. The loser of the ACC championship would probably be behind Alabama, unless it's Clemson, in which case things get a little bit dicier with that. But the Tide still have to hope for that. I think if things go perfectly for Alabama, you have Ohio State winning, Auburn winning, and Clemson winning. And I can't really imagine Alabama rooting for one, let alone all 3 of those teams right now. But you probably need all 3 of those teams to win so you can slide into that 4th spot. Next up, we have Ohio State, which is in a tougher position than Alabama, to be honest with you. Obviously, they have 2 losses, while Alabama only has 1. But their losses are worse than Alabama's. So yes, Alabama just lost to Auburn. If Auburn goes on and wins the SEC championship against Georgia, Alabama's only loss would be to a playoff-worthy playoff team, a conference champion in Auburn, which, if Oklahoma wins, will be the same thing for the Buckeyes, except Ohio State won at home, Alabama won on the road in a rivalry game. I don't know what is in the committee's head. I don't know if rivalry matters. I just don't know. But they also had the blowout loss on the road to Iowa. Now, the one big advantage is that Ohio State would be a conference champion and Alabama would not have even won their division, let alone, obviously, the conference championship. And I'm just going to throw this out there. The committee, in my opinion, has already found 2 ways in 2 of the last 3 years to get Ohio State in when maybe they shouldn't have, when maybe other teams had better criteria, TCU, Baylor, Penn State, yada yada. So even though this is a very cynical way to think about it, the committee has found ways to get Ohio State in the college football playoff. One time it worked out really well. The other time, not so much. I think the best case scenario here is probably Clemson beating Miami, because Miami against Ohio State would win the strength of schedule, and they would both have 2 losses. I say Georgia over Auburn, because that knocks out Auburn, puts Georgia in, probably eliminates Alabama. If you put Alabama and Ohio State side by side, I think Ohio State wins that one as well. And you need Oklahoma to win. Now, you would think TCU being behind Ohio State, Oklahoma being ahead of them, you want Oklahoma to lose. But if Oklahoma loses, that kind of undercuts Ohio State's resume. So if Georgia wins, Clemson wins, and Oklahoma wins, then Ohio State has a pretty good case to actually jump over 2-loss Miami. They would jump over 3-loss Auburn. They would jump over 1-loss Alabama, and they would probably have a pretty good reason for being number 4 in the college football playoff. They do have wins against teams like Michigan and Penn State and Michigan State, so who knows? And Wisconsin in the championship game. So I think they need all 3 of those things to happen to jump in. Yeah, it's a lot to ask for. The last 3 teams where I don't really see them getting in, I think too much needs to happen too late. There's too many teams kind of clogged up at the top, but those teams are TCU, USC, and Penn State. If Notre Dame had beaten Stanford, they probably would have been in that second section, but I keep getting asked about these 3 teams down in the comment section of videos, so I figured I would just address them really quick. Penn State, I don't see them quite getting in. They don't have another game to impress the committee. They lost to Ohio State, and Ohio State and Wisconsin will both be champions of both divisions and one of them of the conference. It's just too much ground to gain. Same with USC. They beat Stanford. That's a really quality win. They would have done it twice. They would have beaten a couple of bowl teams from the conference in there. But ultimately, the loss to Washington State really hurts. Washington State's huge loss against Washington in the Apple Cup stings, as does the trouncing that Notre Dame put on them, and then Notre Dame lost to Stanford. It all kind of cancels out, and they are at number 11. They are behind Penn State, even with a conference championship. I just don't see them moving up enough. Now, I think of all these teams, the most interesting one to me is probably TCU. Their only 2 losses would be to Oklahoma, who they would have vindicated by beating again on a neutral site instead of having to go into Norman to do it, and Iowa State, that was ranked at the time that the Cyclones beat them, and went on to be in the middle of the college football playoff rankings, and they're going bowling. They're a quality team. Iowa State actually also beat Oklahoma, so other than Oklahoma's loss to TCU in the Big 12 championship game, their only other loss was also to the Cyclones. So TCU has a pretty good case, but their non-conference schedule isn't as big as some of these other teams, other than Miami maybe. But Ohio State against Oklahoma, they lost. Clemson beat Auburn. Auburn had wins against Alabama and Georgia twice. It will be interesting. I feel like if that were to happen, if, say, TCU beat Oklahoma, Clemson beat Miami, Auburn beat Georgia, and what's the other one? Ohio State beat Wisconsin. TCU would actually have kind of a case to be the 4th spot. I'm just not sure the committee would quite do it. I'm not sure if you would value a Big 12 champion, which for the last half of the year, the Big 12 did not look like one of the best conferences in the country, especially when they all started kind of cannibalizing each other. Could you move a 2-loss TCU, who's the Big 12 champion, over a really good Oklahoma team, a team that I think right now is probably the 2nd best team in the country behind Auburn? Could you move them all the way from where they are in the rankings from 12 all the way up to 4? I don't know. We'll get more idea on that this Tuesday when the College Football Playoff Committee puts out their new updated rankings. That'll give us a better idea about TCU. Of these 3, where I think they're a little bit of a long shot, I think TCU has the best potential. I just think they're going to come up just a little bit short of that 4 spot, maybe jumping as high as 6, depending on what happens, and that will be with a win over Oklahoma. So there you go. It is really, really difficult to get into the committee's mind when it comes to what they look at. Strength of schedule, margin of victory, player injuries. Were they on the road? Were they at home? Were they neutral? How many road wins do they have? There's all kinds of things the committee looks at, but the way I feel about these teams is kind of how I broke it down. I do think what the committee is really hoping is Auburn wins, Clemson wins, Oklahoma wins, and Wisconsin wins, and then they ain't got to worry about it. But if any of those teams lose, other than maybe Clemson, because Miami would slide in, maybe Auburn because Georgia was slide in. Basically, if Oklahoma or Wisconsin lose, expect absolute pure chaos on the internet for the entire 12 hours until December 3rd at noon when the playoff is officially announced. Oh, we could be in for a lot of chaos, so gear up, folks. And let me know down below in the comments section who you think will be the Final Four, who you think wins the conference championship games this weekend. There's only 4 or 5 that we're talking about in this video, so let me know how you kind of forecast the next 7 days down below in the comments section. Thank you all very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, make sure to give it a big thumbs up. You can also click the circle right there in order to subscribe or watch any of the other videos over there to the right that YouTube has suggested for you. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, until next time. Hey lifers, Dustin here, and now that we are officially done with Rivalry Weekend, we are officially done with the last weekend of the regular season of 2017. Holy crap. It's time to officially look at the final weekend of the season and kind of preview it and see what teams need to do to get into the playoffs. Pittsburgh beat Miami, Auburn beat Alabama, and that was the beginning of some of the chain of reactions that we need to see happen to get some of these teams into the college football playoff. We have, in my opinion, 8 or 9 teams that are vying for 4 spots, and a lot is on the line this weekend in the conference championship games, while other teams have to kind of sit by the wayside and wait and hope that something happens in their favor to get in. So, just a disclosure at the beginning, this is all my opinion. The reason that I made a YouTube channel was to share my opinion and then hear from you. So, let me know down in the comment section what I got wrong, what I got right, and who you think will be the top 4 by this time next week. So the way I'm going to do this is I'm actually going to kind of break it down into 3 sections. The first section is win and basically you're in. The second section is win and pray a little bit. And the third section is you need a lot of help to get in. And we will start at the top with Auburn. With the Tigers beating in the span of, 3 weeks, 2 teams ranked number 1 in the college football playoff. First time that has ever happened in the long-running 4-year history